Haenchen from Pace Marketing, and today I am also joined by Brian Moncey from Black Raven AFC. Good morning, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Well, Brian and I are excited to share with you today a series of questions you can be asking yourself as you prepare your upcoming marketing plans. But before we do, there's a few housekeeping items related to the webinar that I want to cover. First, as we're presenting the content today, you will likely have some questions. We invite you to ask those questions. All you have to do is click on the question and answer link located at the bottom right of your screen. That will pop open a Q&A window where you can type in your question. You can also vote on questions that are there. So if you see another question you want answered, just cast your vote for that question so we know how to prioritize which questions to ask during our Q&A time. One of our team members, TJ, he will be monitoring those questions and he will be our moderator during that Q&A segment. So when you hear a third voice come on, that is who it is. In addition, we know that during these webinars, we all feel some level of frustration as we're learning these great new things, but we know where we should be as related to where we are today. So we invite you to channel that energy into one click at the bottom of your screen. TJ is going to pop up a button that says schedule a roadmap call. When you feel that frustration and you feel like I need help walking through how to solve this gap or this problem, you can click that button, schedule a roadmap call with me, and we can discuss the gaps that you have and the best way to move forward to make progress. All right, that is all of our housekeeping. So let me tell you where we're going to go today. First, we'll give you a brief introduction about Brian and I and who we are. We're going to talk about why you would want to do a marketing assessment. And then we're going to jump into those questions that you're going to ask yourself during that assessment. Those questions would be: what happened? Where do I want to go? How do I get there? And how am I doing? Then finally, we're going to leave some time at the end for us all to do Q&A. All right. And again, question and answer link at the bottom of your screen. Pop that up anytime you have a question and type it in there. And we're happy to answer those questions when we get to the Q&A. So Brian and I both have many years of experience in marketing, and we both love talking about our expertise and sharing what we know. Both of us have worked with many businesses where we see the gaps and how business owners tend to look at their marketing backwards, focusing on the tactics first. And we both take a business approach that focuses on building good foundations with strategy, messaging, and audiences first. And we will talk a little bit more about that later. So our hope today is that you not only start to understand how interwoven marketing is to the success of your business, but also that you leave this webinar with the tools you need to think about it differently. So enough about us. We want to know a little bit more about you. And in order to do that, we're going to add a poll question. Actually, I think the poll questions are already there. So to the right of your Q&A link, you'll see a poll link. You can click on that link and answer our first question, which is: how important is marketing for an average business? So go ahead and answer that poll question. We're going to talk a little bit more about your answers later in the webinar. Okay, let's start jumping in. Why a marketing assessment? Why would you want to assess your marketing in the first place? Well, it's about intentionality. And I think everybody here who's a business owner knows that we have to be intentional with the way we're running our business in order for our business to go where we want it to go. The analogies I can think about from a personal standpoint is: would you plan a family vacation without thinking about how much money you have to spend, how much time you have for that vacation, and where you might want to go? Would you hire a new employee without knowing what role they need to fill, what salary range that employee needs to be within, and how they're going to help the company with the goals that the company has? No. And marketing is the same way. It is one of the three main pillars of your business. When you look at operations, you look at finance, then you have marketing, which is a really big bucket of activities that entail a lot of different things for your business. And we're going to talk about even just a small portion of that bucket. But it is vital to your business's sustainability. And so you want to think about that with intentionality and think about how that translates into tangibles for your business and how that's interrelated with the other pillars of your business. So you're going to look at it by looking at the different aspects that it affects within your business. I recently heard a pastor define excellence as doing the best we can with what we currently have. We know in our businesses that we have some limitations. So we really need to be intentional in how we approach marketing so that we can utilize what we have in the best way possible. And that translates into using our budgets, planning our spend, and stewarding that spend well so that we're using our marketing dollars on the highest priorities that will have the biggest impact. It affects our time. We have limited amounts of time, especially if you're a business owner who's trying to do marketing yourself, and marketing is not an expertise that you hold personally. You have to be very careful about how you're using that time. So we need to prioritize tactics and activities that, again, have the biggest impact for our business and help us grow, reach our goals the fastest, whether that's growth or another goal. And then growth. Most business owners really do want to grow their business. And so in order to do that, we have to be intentional and plan how we're growing and then adjust those plans if we see that they're not working as well as we hoped. So what we're trying to help you avoid is spending a significant amount of time or money on something and then later finding out that it didn't have the impact you expected. I can't see people's hands, but if I asked you the question, have you spent significant time or money on something and then later found out it didn't contribute to your growth or progress at all, I know all of your hands would be raised. So how do we avoid this? Well, it starts by assessing and asking ourselves these important questions. So what's the first question? The first question we want to ask ourselves is what happened? Here's where we're going to reflect on the past, what has happened in our business, and how did it go? So I like to look at this in 3 buckets. I also really like alliteration, so I made them 3 Ps: performance, people, and promotion. Circling back to the pillars I talked about before, we need to understand the business as a whole, and we will discuss why we do that a little later, but it involves the performance of the business, how it performed financially, looking and ideally looking back over several years, 3 to 5 years at least. The people who contributed to the success and how they contributed, and what promotion or marketing was done to influence that performance. Now, Brian is going to talk to us a little bit more about company performance.
Yeah. So let's talk about metrics. Obviously you think about the way your business performs and you're thinking about the way you feel about it is often where people start. It's like, I just really feel like we're going in a good direction. I feel like we're not going in a good direction. That is, in an absence of metrics, that's the way you live your life. Well, the problem is like, depending on what you ate for breakfast that morning, you're going to feel differently. Metrics and assessing your metrics allow you to actually have a real finger on the pulse of what's really going on in your business. And so when you go back to looking at what's happened in your business up to this point, the good news is like in historical, your numbers can be accurate and exact. You can capture those numbers and then know what really happened to you. And what kind of numbers are we looking at in the business? Well, like one of those is your revenue. I mean, that seems like the most obvious one. But for some businesses, revenue is important. And then for other businesses, understanding as well your cash flow. Like where are you at from a cash flow standpoint? Knowing what you pulled in helps you to evaluate how well you're doing. It helps you evaluate, what steps you can make, as Stephanie said, like, how you can make hiring decisions, et cetera. Like all of those things are important. So actually measuring your revenue and measuring your cash flow are one of the, top of your list of metrics. Another thing, once you understand that, is to look through your profitability and your profit margins. So understanding both profitability, knowing that number of, what we brought in, what we spent to do that equals profitability, right? Well, and of course, an enhanced, more deliberate P&L will give you profit and loss statement, will give you those numbers. But another thing to understand too is profit margins. So activities that you do within your business and your business as a whole operating with profit margin in mind. Profitability is, of course, super important, but how much did it take for you to earn that dollar at the end of it and that profit? If it took you $99 to get to the one, it helps you to understand that the business activities you're taking are not running at an efficient margin as well. And conversely, if there's activities that you're doing within your business that are extremely profitable in and of themselves, from a marginal standpoint, you may put energy into those pieces because you know that, right? So that's why profit margins as well as profitability are important. Another thing is to understand revenue per client or per customer. Understand what on an average, what each customer brings in, as well as understanding what your top performing and your lowest performing clients or customers are. That'll give you a lot of insight into what you're going to do next. Another thing to look at would be your number of customers and clients. Now, depending on your business, you may have one client and that may be everything to you. But when you really understand your business, diversification of clients, understanding how many more clients you're going to need, looking forward to how do I staff for the amount of clients that I have, the amount of customers that I have, what are my resources, what are the cost of goods sold for each of those clients and customers. Just knowing the number of customers in the first place is going to make a huge impact on you. And that's a number, again, that you should be able to pull on a regular basis. And then understanding for me is the average, client or customer lifetime value. We'll get into how to develop that more later, but what is a customer worth to you from a number standpoint, not from a relational standpoint, not from a future standpoint, but what is that actual lifetime value? And getting down to a point where you can calculate that number on a customer basis to understand what the average customer is worth. It's going to inform a bunch of what we're about to talk about today with the metrics, that metric is going to inform a lot of the marketing activities and choices that you make.
Perfect. And as Brian said, those numbers are very important. But we also want to look at the people who contributed to those numbers. So who on our team, we're going to look first at our team, our internal people, who on our team is contributing to that performance? Well, everybody on our team, but how? And what is the current capacity, right? So in the case of businesses like Brian and I, we have people who are billable, spend billable time, and we have people who spend non-billable time. That may not be the same in your business, but you're really looking at what is your current capacity to produce what you have already, what you've been producing already. How many of those resources are internal versus external? And is there talent within your team that can be turned into a service? So maybe there's a skill set on your team that you're not utilizing to its full capacity that could be turned in or promoted more in order to create a new product line or service or something to that extent. So it's going back and looking at where our team is now helps us unearth opportunities for later. Then we want to look at our clients or customers, whatever you call them, right? Who are the best clients or customers? What do they have in common? Where are they? And why are they good clients? And then finally, what you're looking for are commonalities. You're looking for groups of people that you can target when we're planning ahead to these customers have this in common, and you can relate that to the performance that Brian was talking about. Well, these customers in this industry provide us with higher margins on our product or service, or these customers in this specific industry provide 75% of our revenue, right? Whatever it may be, you're looking for those commonalities, basically, so you could double down later on reaching those clients or customers. But finally, we want to understand, how did we connect with them? How did they get into the point that they became a customer or client? Which brings me to the next P, which is promotion. What did we do? What marketing activities did we have that brought those clients to us? I like to bucket. I like to arrange things personally. And so I like to put things in buckets and think about this in the what we did, and how we understand the promotions that affected our business. So first, from a brand awareness standpoint, what kind of things did we do just to have visibility of our brand and our company out in the marketplace? Were we advertising? Were there ongoing activities we were doing to stay in front of our current customers as well as stay in front of the target markets we were looking at, our audiences? Those are the kinds of things we want to make sure we're doing. These are consistent activities, right? Email marketing that happens regularly, social media that's happening regularly and consistently, things that keep you out in front of people so that when the problem that they have that aligns with the value you provide pops up, your name, your brand is right in front of them. Next bucket we look at is lead acquisition. These are the things we're doing specifically to generate leads with calls to action for people to take action and reach out to us to learn more. These could be specific campaigns or promotions, special offers, or nurturing that happens. Let's say someone does click a button, right? Just like our call to action button at the bottom. You click that, you fill that out, you schedule a call. There's some things we can do as organizations to nurture that relationship and stay in front of the prospect. And then finally, word of mouth. We all know that word of mouth has been and always will be one of the best tools we can use to build and grow our businesses. So what kind of activities are you doing from a marketing standpoint in that category? Networking opportunities? Are there partnerships, strategic partnerships that you have that it's easy to pass big business back and forth between each other? Are there existing clients that you need to be more intentional about reaching out to and asking for referrals or receiving referrals?
Steph, can I ask you a question about that?
Absolutely.
A lot of businesses are probably going, yeah, we just nailed all these buckets. But for some of us, and let's just say like companies like Black Raven, for instance, I'm seeing stuff on here that we just didn't do at all. So in this assessment part of when you're looking backwards, like what does a company do when they go, we just didn't do any of that stuff? Like, how do you are you allowed to just skip over that in this when we're looking at what happened and
yeah,
what we did?
Absolutely. In the assessment part, we're really just collecting information. What did we do? Like, how much effort did we put towards this promotion? Because what it does is it helps you see where your holes are, where you could be spending more time versus the things that you did do. We're going to actually jump into how they performed and how effective they were, like evaluating how effective they were. It's really just collecting the information at this point and recognizing, not to feel bad about yourself or your team or performance, but just to go, here's our current state, here's where we are, here are the things we did, and here's how they fit into growing, attracting the right customers and growing our business.
Yeah. Well, and I assume a lot of the people that you work with and a lot of the people that we work with, we find them at the state of really being pre-marketing. Like they may have a successful business, but they don't do marketing. They don't really do I would say buckets 1 and 2, especially. It's like, we don't do anything about that. We do everything on networking and partnerships and clients.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that either. Like there's nothing wrong with having built your business on, just word of mouth reputation.
Exactly.
But the challenge that we also see is that that has no levers to pull. Like you cannot really do anything about word of mouth. It just happens or it doesn't happen, right? And so the first 2 buckets are where you can actually take deliberate activity. And so just being pre-marketing doesn't mean you're a bad company. It could mean that you're doing great, but you don't have levers to pull. When you look back and you see, gosh, we really didn't do this, we really didn't do this, we really didn't do this. It's because you're just pre-marketing. It's okay. That's an okay place to be. But if you want to move forward in the future, like as we keep looking forward, like looking at what you didn't do is as important as looking at what you did do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like how you call it the levers that you pull. I also will point out that a lot of companies we work with, they will come to us saying, we don't do any marketing. Yeah. We don't do anything. And I always want to say, well, that's BS. You do something because you have customers, right? And so they're people are often a little further along than they think they are, but they also know that they have so much further to go. And so it's our job to kind of help them understand that, yeah, you're doing some of it with this networking or this word of mouth or how you've grown your business, but is that going, like you said, is that still going to be what works to get you to the next level where you want to go? So, speaking of this promotion, so we want to look at what we did, right? This is just how did we promote? These are the activities we did. And now, Brian, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about how effective those promotions were. So, why don't you jump into that for us?
Yeah. So, the number, the word I like to always, or the phrase I should say that I always gravitate towards is a cost per result. Understanding a cost per result is basically understanding, like, for the activities we pursue, what is our cost, what do we get out of that, right? And that ROI. But I like thinking in a cost per result because the difference between, doing a lead acquisition campaign on a paid solution and doing a networking event, those are not apples and apples. Those are oranges and, broccoli. Like, they're two totally different things. Like, so to compare those against each other is really, really hard. What a CPR does is a CPR says, okay, we can determine what the cost to our company was going into these activities, and we can determine what we got out of those activities. So drilling down into what a CPR is understanding, as I said before, that customer lifetime value. That's sort of the first thing you need to understand. So in your business, what is a customer financially worth to you over the lifetime of your business and the lifetime over the interactions with your customer? If you only have, if you sell, everything you sell is just $100,000 and you can never buy it again, then the customer lifetime value is $100,000. If you sell something that's $1, but people buy it every single day and they buy it on average for a year, then you know that they're worth $365. So that's the way of understanding a customer lifetime value, CLV. And when you know that, and it's not a perfect science, you don't have to get it down to exactly knowing down to the dime what that is. But what you do need to do is understanding what that CLV is going to help drive you towards figuring out what your cost per result is, because you now know, gosh, we know that $100,000 client worth winning them is worth a lot more money, because every time we win one of those, we get $100,000 in the bank, right? So you understand that by, taking the average sale of the client, the average number of transactions, the average retention period, like I said before, and then focusing on the marginal aspect of what that CLV is. So knowing that for that $100,000 one-time only client, which is going to be worth $100,000 to me over the course of their world, what we do with those is we say, okay, we need to know how much margin it takes. We know what the cost of goods sold is for that. We need to understand, in general, what it costs to run our business. So, when we say we need 10 $100,000 clients, that's $1 million. I'm using really simple math here because I can't do it on the fly. But if we know that to run our business, it costs us $700,000 to run our business, that puts us at a profit margin of $300,000, right? So for each of those clients, those $100,000 clients are now worth $30,000 a piece of margin. Okay, so what would I then spend, a cost per result? What would I spend to get $300,000 or $30,000? That's the question you want to ask. Because then as you're addressing all of your future promotional activities, you can now hold them up and say, like, this networking event I'm going to go to is a happy hour that's free and I can go after work. And from those events, I usually net about 10 leads, and 1 in 10 leads turns into a client, right? That would be a way that you'd go, well, of course, this is worth our CPR. Whereas if you said, hey, to get 1 client, it cost me $50,000 on paid advertising. Well, you'd go, well, it's not worth it because we know that we get $30,000 value out of every client we get. We don't want to spend that time. So figuring out that CPR is really important. And it's a complicated process. But once you understand what your CPR is as a business, then you can go in and actually start understanding, what worked at that CPR didn't. You can review the actual spend versus your budgeted spend, and get down to like seeing like what was our real ROI. And at the end of the day, that'll help you in comparison to your margin and understand your profit and loss. Like now you'll understand much deeper. It's like, okay, so marketing affected that like this. And so it'll give you the opportunity to then spend more money that's going to make you more money.
Awesome. I have a follow-up question for you, Brian, on this. So I'm thinking about businesses that maybe have a variety of product lines or services that maybe that cost per result is going to be different depending on the product or service a client comes in to utilize. How would you approach that? If someone's doing an assessment, how would you recommend they approach that if they have multiple product lines or services that they need to evaluate?
Number one, prioritize your product lines. If you did the previous metrics and you looked at what was bringing you in money, you can usually stack that up. I will caution
Mhm.
everyone. I'll say this every single day of my life. Probably you can't scale zero, and so just because something has not made you any money does not mean it can't make you any money. But in general, as a business and knowing what your inertia is and knowing what you're doing as a business, you want to look at the things that have been making you money and start prioritizing those off of. We know that we make a lot of money here. We know we don't do this, et cetera, and go down the list. So start at the top, because if you can figure out your CPR for that, that's also the number one thing you'd want to be driving leads for. Now, caveat, like what if you don't have the resource to overserve this? And so you're completely tapped out on the supply side. Well, then to jump down to the next one and really dig in on what it would take to grow that. If you have a new line of business and you're trying to test the market for that line of business, developing a CPR at the beginning is really, really smart. So doing it for early stuff. But I would say that the best way to think about it is to triage your service lines around, figuring out CPRs. There's probably some things that you don't really care about figuring out what the CPR is because you don't plan on marketing it. But triage those through, figure out what your top priority items are, et cetera, and then get down to the point where you've got sort of an ordered list of CPRs. And then also like understand that there is a MVP, minimum viable product, for a CPR. And that number is sort of like, how could I not spend this much money to win this? For those $100,000 clients, I guarantee you, if it's a $30,000 take, everyone that is listening to me right now would be willing to spend $1 to make $30,000, like every single time. I don't have to figure anything else out. I just know that I would spend that every
I'll hand you $1 right now, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I mean, you'd go to the bank and you'd get as many dollars as you could get to spend if you could get $30,000 every time, right? So there's a number between 1 and N that is easy for you to guess at with your CPR. And so without tailoring down a perfect CPR for every single line item, you can go, well, I'd be willing to spend this much on it. And so then when you look at a marketing activity for any of your products, any of your services, anything you do as a business, when you look at those particular products, you're going to go, oh, that's our minimum is $10. We would always spend $10 to get 100, Well, then it's like, okay, that's my CPR. And so you can also just, fudge in the number, that minimum viable product number for each of them as well. And you can guess that. Your gut will get you there before the math will get you there. And you can just guess that, figure that out, and then go from there, and then tailor it down. And treat this as an active practice in your business as well, and assessing yourself. Because if the market changes, in our business, sometimes technology changes very much in our favor. So sometimes the solutions we offer become way more valuable to us. And so therefore acquiring those clients becomes more valuable, and our CPR improves as well. We'd be willing to spend more money to get them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great. So this concludes what we need to look at when we're asking ourselves what happened. Those are the types of things we need to evaluate when we're asking ourselves what happened. And so our next question we want to look at is, where do I want to go? So quite frankly, we're going to look at the same types of things we looked at with what happened. We're just going to look at it in the context of looking towards the future rather than looking towards the past. So you'll notice on this slide that when we're looking at where we want to go, right now I only have performance in people, and that is strategic. There is a reason for that, because we're going to dive in a little deeper on the aspects you want to look at for promotion. But performance in people is really setting up the company's strategy and goals. And one of the reasons why we want to look at the where we want to go before we start jumping into marketing activities and tactics is in order for those activities and tactics to be successful, and we will talk about this a little more later, they need to align with where the company's performance is going and the people that we have to support that. And remember that the people includes the audiences. So actually, we're going to go ahead and jump in. Brian's going to talk a little bit more about these things, the company performance and the people that the company has and is reaching, both clients and team members. And he's going to talk more about how that then translates into setting our marketing goals and audiences. Brian, why don't you talk first about goals?
For sure. So, I mean, it's without vision, the people will perish, is a good way to think about it. But when you really are thinking about your business, like this is the visionary component of a business, and vision trickles down at each level. And whether you're the owner of the company or you're somebody at some sort of different layer down in the company, like you still need to be able to contribute vision and where you're trying to go with things. So, call it vision or call it goals. Figuring that out is that's the most important thing you can do. And it also, again, takes you out of the moments where you're really, you're just, do I feel like we're winning? Do I feel like this is working? Turning yourself into where you actually have working goals is going to make a big difference. And so that leads into what, KPIs. So, your key performance indicators, your KPIs, hopefully you've heard this term, you're familiar with it. But figuring out what those KPIs are is going to be important because now you'll have a way to measure your business outside of the metrics, that for instance, like we talked about, you got to figure out your revenue, you got to figure out your profit, you got to figure out your profit margins. Those are not KPIs. Those are the bottom line numbers, right? But figuring out in your business, figuring out KPIs, key performance indicators, those are earlier stage things that track towards what you're going to be doing. So like one of the ones we have is leads and referrals, right? And so it's like, so how many leads do I bring through the door? That's something that you can make contribution to from your marketing. And it's something that that has a direct proportionality to growth in your business. So understanding leads and referrals, growing your awareness, doing awareness campaigns, building your brand, getting out there, making sure that people see who you are, know who you are, that when they have the problem, they know to address you about it, right? So those are, how can you build KPIs around awareness? Like, is that points of contact that you have with people that are not leads? Because this, sort of precedes leads as awareness, but how can you build that up? And then thinking through for your business what those other ones are, because if you don't understand what those are, you won't understand what's going to contribute to the profit growth that you want to see and growth of the business. And then getting into the cost per result too is just, as we said before, is like understanding those cost per results help you define that. Now, when we get into who your audience is and what does that audience mean, the way that we look at audience is we really look at it through three factors. So the three factors are demographics, geographics, and psychographics. So demographics, meaning, that can mean everything from who they are as a person. We of course, in marketing has a tendency to be not very politically correct in a lot of ways. That's not my worry as a marketer. My bigger worry as a marketer is often that we isolate and exclude people that really would be valuable to us. So remember, in your demographics, you always want to hold up that value of that audience being important and valuable people, and not thinking from an exclusionary standpoint, but thinking more about like, who are those people out there that we provide great value to, and then figuring out who they are. So getting around the demographics of what those are, is that person, does it have something to do with age? Like you're much better for people that, younger people that don't have families and you have this sort of product, or older people who are, later in life and doing in retirement home. Like those are things that are important to know about them, right? And so there's different ways you can scale that and scope that to figure out what's going to be most valuable for your business, without being somebody who is a biased human being. You can do this because you're turning it around on value and knowing where your value will be seen. And again, I just have to overemphasize that the audience first mentality is thinking of them first, not yourself. So you don't have time for ego and bias. You have to be working on their behalf all the time. And it brings value to the community while you're also providing a good service to the community. Getting into geographics, understanding where they are, like it does matter. If you're a retail brick and mortar store, your geographics absolutely matter. And where you're bringing people to. If you are a service-based business that's completely digital, your geographics change. You're able to service people at different places. Getting a deeper dive into your business, though, and understanding what you really do as a business may determine your geographics. Like where our team is not always stretching our arms on a marketing effort outside of a pretty, about 100-mile radius around where we are right now. We work with clients across the United States, but we don't market to them. So getting down to the geographics of where you're trying to reach is going to also help you keep costs down and help you figure out the best way to reach that audience. And finally is psychographics. Psychographics are, what the client does, what they do, their job, what they have to do for a living, what they have to do as as part of their daily routine. It's a need that they have. It's like what they have to do. Then there's their pain points, things that are getting in the way of them living their lives, things that are getting in the way of their doing those jobs, things that are a challenge to the work that they do. And then lastly is gains. What would improve their life? What would remove, what would help them move forward? How can they grow as a person? How can they start doing something they weren't doing before? So that brings in all three of those things, the demographics, the geographics, and the psychographics, especially with psychographics, the jobs, the pains, and the gains. Defining that around your audience and doing the homework really takes a whiteboard and just some time. And if you can get down to that and be able to clarify and customize those personas, you're now going to be able to much better meet those goals and those KPIs because you know whom you're doing it for.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're going to build, hopefully you've noticed that this is all building upon itself. And we're going to get to a point where you see why all of what we're talking about now, this sounds like a lot of details to look into and to really take the time to think through, but they're going to build upon each other in order to get us to the best result. So the next thing outside of audience that you need to think about from a marketing perspective is budget. Who wants to think about budget? Well, I say that as a marketer, like Brian said, don't ask me to do hard math in my head. I'm sure there are some people on this call who love the numbers and would probably get sucked into spending a lot of time on the budget. But what kind of budget do you need? So we wanted to give you some context for creating a budget. Marketing budgets can range anywhere from 1 to 20% of revenue. Now, this is according to the Small Business Chronicle article I found, as well as some recommendations in an article from the SBA. Typically, B2C, business to consumer businesses, spend a higher percentage on marketing than business to business. On average, according to a Web Strategies report in 2018, on average, B2C companies are spending about 10% versus B2B companies are a little over 6%. But there are some other factors that you'll want to consider when you're considering your budget. For example, a new business or a new product is going to require a larger budget. So think back to that idea of awareness and brand awareness. If you're a new business or you have a new product that nobody knows about yet, it's going to take more money and more time to get in front of those people and start helping them understand. It's like dating, right? It's like dating. You need to be exposed to that person. You need to be building a relationship, etc. And that just takes a little more time and money to do if you have no previous exposure, right? Also, higher volume of sales, like companies with higher volumes of sales will have a bigger impact with a smaller percentage. So I'm going to use an example of Walmart. Walmart spends like $3 billion on marketing. And I know we all wish we had a $3 billion budget, but they also have $500 billion in sales. So their marketing budget is less than 1% because they have a massive amount of revenue, right? So just consider that. You need to take that consideration. If you're a smaller company, for you to only spend 1% of your revenue may be doing you a disservice. So you need to really make some considerations of what's really going to get us where we need to be within the context of what's doable for your business. And then also your current level, as I mentioned before with a new product or business, your current level of brand awareness impacts your needs for marketing budget. As Brian mentioned before, when we were talking about those buckets, the word of mouth bucket is great, but it's solely dependent on your capacity to be out in the community and in front of people, or in front of your clients, right? Versus the other buckets give you more exposure to more people with less investment of time, if that makes sense. And so we want to be aware of what our current level of brand awareness is so that we know kind of what we need to allocate to stay in front of people from a financial standpoint. So from a budget standpoint, I wanted to kind of give you some context as well as what to be thinking about when you're thinking about budgeting. Because oftentimes people say, we have $25,000 for marketing. Go use that. Well, there are different parts and pieces to your marketing. Some of them are outward facing and some of them are internal, right? So if you have $25,000 total in your budget for marketing, you do not have $25,000 to spend with a publication or Google Ads or something to that extent, right? Because there are operating costs and project costs and systems and software that we need to have in place and pay for in order to make the marketing engine run, right? And so oftentimes I like to coach people on, yes, there is the cost of placing that ad. Let's say it's a print ad or a Google ad, but there's also cost of developing the ad. And so we need to take that in consideration while we're planning our budgets. Okay, and then finally, we're going to think about, when we're planning for the future, we also want to think about how will we measure our marketing effectiveness. And Brian gave us some great benchmarks when we were looking at cost per result. We're looking at leads and referrals, those types of things. What are the numbers? What are the most concrete things we can use to say, yes, this plan is working, or no, this plan is not working? Because we have so much access to data today that it no longer makes sense for us to wait until the end of the year to assess whether or not our marketing plan worked. We can be looking at it on a monthly, like however often we want, honestly, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, at least a quarterly basis. We should be evaluating how is our plan going and looking at it related to that threshold that Brian was talking about with the cost per result. How much am I willing to spend to get to that cost per result? And are these activities that I'm doing actually contributing to that, right? So we want to plan how we're going to measure it, whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's I'm going to do interviews with customers just to see what their experiences are. Are they financial reports? Are we pulling data from our CRM? Is it a combination of all of those things? But we want to think through it, because if we, in my experience, if clients do not plan how they're going to evaluate their marketing efforts, they will not evaluate their marketing efforts. If the plan is not in place and the structure is not in place before you begin, it will likely not happen. So with that said, we're going to pause because we know we've thrown a lot of information at you, and I want to see how you all have answered that first poll question. So let me go and look. All right, how important is marketing for an average business? We had 1 vote for a 1, but we had 13 votes. Most of 92.9% of people said it was a 5, the most important, the most very important. That is great. That is great.
One.
Oh. You want to? Well, maybe someone thought 1 was most important, and they, I don't know. But nobody answered 2, 3, or 4. So spectrum.
That might be just because they would feel bad for us, since this is what we do for a living and for our passion.
That is true. That is true.
They were just like, we don't want to make Brian and Steph feel bad.
So we're going to give them a 5. It's very important. It's very important. Yeah. A lot of you have already answered our next question, but if you haven't, go ahead and go back to the poll. And we want to get a feel for you and your business. How effective is marketing for your business now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now also after everything we just said, like
Mm-hmm.
understanding all those numbers and stuff, does that affect your answer? Did you go, yeah, we were doing great, and now you're like, I wasn't looking at anything, or was it confirmation that you're actually further along than you thought you were? But think about that number, as it's even changed in the last 45 minutes.
Yeah. Perfect.
But then,
Okay. So we're
because otherwise the poll doesn't work.
yeah. So answer. All right. So how do I get there? This is the next step we're going to take. So we asked we reflected on the past, we thought about the future, and now it's time to go, okay, what are we going to do to reach those goals that we set? The first step we look at from a marketing standpoint is, again, we have to reflect a little. We need to understand our customers, or we need to understand the journey they take to get to the point where they're willing to spend money with our businesses and keep spending money and spending more money with our businesses. So we call that a customer journey in marketing. And this hourglass figure, a lot of people have probably heard of a sales funnel. And the funnel is basically the top part. How do we capture them and get them to the point of a sale? But we do this as an hourglass. And the reason we do it that way is because we all know that the sale doesn't end once they buy something, unless there really is a product, like Brian said, that you buy one at $100,000 and you never buy anything again from that same company. Well, then the sale ends, but there's still probably with a product that's $100,000, there's still pieces that need to happen in order to.
I figured out what business that would be.
What is it? What is it?
Caskets.
That's not funny. Okay. I shouldn't laugh at that.
Laugh though.
Okay. So, but even if you get to the point of the sale where you buy a casket, there are things once that sale takes place that a company needs to do to nurture that client so that they can be an advocate for that company, right? So this is the process we're talking about, going from unaware, where they are not aware of your company, they're not aware of your product or service, and the other piece is they're not aware of the need that they have for your product or service. So when we think about marketing, I think sometimes marketing gets a bad rap and sales gets a bad rap because people are like, oh, we're trying to force people to buy something they don't need. No. What we're doing is we're looking for alignment between the product, the value our product or service has, and the need, the pain, the gain that the client could get by using our product or service, right? So in the unaware stage, they are unaware both of us, our brand, our product or service, and their need for it. In the next stage, the notice stage, they have started to recognize, maybe they've seen your logo, they've seen something you've posted, they've seen an ad, they're starting to recognize your brand. They're starting to notice you, they see you across the room, they connect with your eyes, right? In the dating scenario. But they also might be starting to recognize their own need for that product or service. Then the connect phase is where they actually connect with your company in some way, shape, or form. That could be a face-to-face meeting. That could be reading an article you posted. That could be filling out a form to download a free ebook, anything like that. Any kind of interaction they have with your company, that is the connect stage. And that connect stage kind of covers everything, all of those interactions up to the point that they say, yes, I want to buy your product or service. So then once they buy your product or service, now they've decided you're the right fit for them and they're becoming a client, but they're still judging, for lack of a better word, their experience with you and your brand, right? So think about, like, if I use the dating analogy, think about if I say, yes, I'll go on a date with you. In that first date, I said yes, but I'm still feeling out, like, is this really the right person for me, right? Is this really the right product or service for me? Think about, like, often, there's been several times that I have succumbed to the Instagram algorithm and bought something that I thought I really needed, and I got it and used it. Anything to get rid of dog hair on the chairs. I could just keep the dogs from getting on the chairs, but they really like those spots. And so, how do I get the dog hair off the chair? I've bought many a product, and in this partner stage have been abandoned. Nope, this was not the product for me. This did not really work, right? Or this one is excellent. And once I say or decide that this one is excellent, I'm going to do several things. I'm going to grow with that company. I may look at other products and services that they have in order to solve more of the needs that I have. But also, I may become an advocate for them. I may be willing to tell other people about them and who they are. And as we all know, that word of mouth funnel actually can be one of the less expensive ways for us to get business, because if I'm referring somebody, they're going to come in to the funnel further down, more in that notice phase or connect phase, because they were introduced to you or your business by someone that they know, like, or trust. Okay, so understanding how your customers or clients come to you is one, very important, and the process you take them through, right? It may be they find us online, they click on a link, they buy something on a website. For a company like Brian and I, they connect with us either by referral or some ad that they've seen. We have a consultation, we create a proposal. So there might be some more steps for us in the connect phase to review and negotiate and make sure that they understand what they'd be getting in the scope of the work we're doing. Okay, so we know that. Then I like to look at building our marketing as a pyramid. And here's why. The customer journey aligns with how we build our marketing plan, because it helps us identify where we might have holes. So think of like those buckets we talked about earlier. I could go real deep into this. I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you that something like an advertisement is going to align with a certain part of the customer journey that's, unaware or notice phase, right? Or maybe even connect phase, versus a white paper or something like this webinar is going to be further down in that funnel where they connect and they're willing to, they align with the content you're sharing. They're willing to seek it out, right? So we have that. But then this graphic helps depict the foundation up approach that I touched on earlier when I was talking about Brian and I and how we approach things in our businesses. We got to connect why we asked all of these questions. And here's why we asked all those questions from earlier. One, we need our marketing strategy at the foundation. That marketing strategy is what aligns with the overall company strategies and goals. So Brian talked a little bit about some of the KPIs we can utilize in building that marketing strategy and the goals related to that marketing strategy. And so then, as we're deciding, okay, how do we reach those goals? What do we do to get to those goals? We can think of it in a couple of ways. One, your marketing foundation. Your foundation are the things that you will need in place to help your business scale long term. So the foundational pieces are going to help with long-term growth. They're the things that help you be visible with your brand development. They help you establish authority with how you're messaging your product or service. They help you maintain a consistent presence within your digital foundation. And they also provide you with structural integrity with your systems and processes, right? So remember how I talked about with the budget that you need to have some systems or software in place. So things like, or your digital foundation would be like your website, your social media accounts, like having those foundations in place and set up to make it easier for you to scale. So when you're ready to, in a place to really double down on those activities, you have the foundational pieces in place. Now, is it important to have all of the foundational pieces you will ever need in place? No, this is a continual process of building upon that foundation as your company grows. Your foundational pieces may change a little bit as your company gets bigger. Okay, so we have the foundational pieces. that feeds into our campaign. So when you think about website, maybe an email marketing system, a CRM, etc., all of those pieces are going to help us then go, all right, we want to build a campaign. What's the purpose? This is an integrated approach to communicating around a purpose. So when I say integrated approach, we're going to talk about tactics. It's using multiple tactics to communicate a message around a purpose like lead generation or brand awareness. We have a specific goal in mind with a campaign, right? It could be this campaign is for this product and our goal is to get X number of leads. It could be this campaign is specifically to build brand awareness and that is it, right? So we're going to do these things and we're going to do these things consistently. So we want to think about what are the purposes we have that can align with those goals we talked about earlier, and then how are we going to do that within a campaign? What messaging contributes to that campaign? Who are we targeting? Those foundational pieces will all feed in to that. Where do they need to go on the website to find out more, etc. Then finally, the place that most people start, we're finally at tactics. Now we're talking about what are the detailed activities that feed those campaigns and then feed our marketing engine, right? What are the ongoing activities? So if it's a brand awareness campaign, what activities like social media, email, content development are going to help us with consistently being in front of our audiences and helping to drive awareness? And this will be different based on the company, its product or service. We work with a hospital. One of their primary goals is awareness. And so it's very important for them to stay in front of their audience consistently and on a regular basis and to be involved in the community, right? Okay. There's also tactics that will align with campaigns that serve a specific goal. So if our specific goal is referrals or lead generation, we might build a campaign that includes multiple ads, all that feed into a specific landing page that they can fill out a form and schedule a call or download an ebook or something to that extent. And then there's plans to nurture those leads over time automatically and also through personal touches. We won't go into all of the specific tactics you could use today because quite frankly, there are just way too many options. If you look at Brian and I kind of focus in a little bit different areas of marketing, and I think we both could probably name 10 to 15 different tactics off the top of our head. And so it's what we want you to understand with this is it's important to choose your tactics in a way that builds upon everything else we've learned. Okay. They will be dependent on your foundational pieces. They'll be dependent on what we learned about our audiences. And then we need to get to the point where we're going to implement those tactics. Now, this is a very brief part of plan building that can be time consuming, but hopefully you're getting the sense that building a marketing plan, there's a lot of components to understand to choose your tactics wisely. So we're going to go ahead and talk very briefly about how to do this. So once we do this, then we need to implement it. And that is the last question we're going to cover, which is the how am I doing? Brian, you were going to cover how are we doing?
I think we're doing great. Oh, sorry.
Yes, we are doing wonderful. But how does our audience understand how they're doing once they pick their campaigns and tactics?
Right. Well, simple is better. And especially when you're doing it a lot of times, it's easier to replicate. But we have a way of looking at this. And if you can shift to that graph, basically, this is super, super simple. It looks like I drew it on a whiteboard because that's what you should be doing is on a whiteboard. And really, it's just follow this, these 4 steps. So the first, 5 steps. Start with your audience, of course, identify who that audience is, make sure that you write them on the board and that they matter. Because if you're that hospital and you're doing that awareness and you don't really talk about the community first, you're going to be everything you're going to do is going to be hitting in the wrong spot and not making the benefit that you want. And then the next step that you jump to is project planning, actually figuring out what you're going to do, how you're going to go about making that happen. And then when you move into the third step, it's actually when you move into the implementation of like, how do we actually go about doing this? Now, this is really important that you can't glance over. This is really the meat of this whole thing, is getting through actually implementing these tactics, because this is what takes your time. This is what takes your budget. This is what takes really, it's the hardest part of doing anything. And most plans fail in implementation. That's really where they break down. As you start, you got an audience, you've got a project, and then you don't finish implementation. So focus heavily on implementation and how you're doing on implementation. And then the last step, of course, is after you launch that, is to run analytics. Figure out what and run those metrics on how you performed. And then if you notice what makes it look like a little smiley face, I don't know why the thing looks like a Peanuts character to me, but it has a very Peanuts character smile. But if you go back, then you go back to project planning again. So your audience doesn't change. Now you may reassess who the audience is that you're trying to reach, but when you do those analytics, then you loop back around and you redo your project planning on your next round and your next bout so that you can do it better next time. And so in this constant cycle of iteration and growth, that debriefing and then coming back and doing the analytics allows you to then apply everything you learned on the job to do it better the next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that wraps up all of the questions we need to ask ourselves when we're building our marketing roadmap. And so just to recap really quickly of the benefits that we get as business owners from building this roadmap, we can intentionally plan for our business growth. We can save time and money. We can create consistency to stay visible to that audience that we're trying to reach. We're able to scale our businesses faster, and we're able to choose tactics that will align with our higher level business goals. So that wraps up the content we have today. Again, if you have a question, we're going to open it up for Q&A here in just a second. Put it in the question box, and at any point while we're doing Q&A, you can add a question. If for some reason we don't get to a question, I believe we can see who asked the question, and we'll try to follow up with people after the webinar to get your question answered. So just at any point, just a reminder that at any point you feel like you want to talk through how to do a marketing plan, how to implement it further, you felt that tension of where you are versus where you want to be, you can click the button below to schedule a roadmap call. PACE does have a program that we partner with Black Raven to do called a marketing physical that helps business owners walk through this whole process to provide clarity. So we're happy to walk through that with you. We hope that this content was super valuable. We know that we're right at 12 o'clock now, so we're going to go ahead and ask questions, but we understand if you have to jump off, go ahead and jump off. TJ, we are ready for some questions. You want to go ahead and ask away?
Absolutely. So first question, and I know we talked about a lot, so this kind of simplifies it a little bit. Based on what we're discussing today, what's the easiest first step to take?
Do you want to go first, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say the easiest first step to take is the quick assessment of who you've been working with and what's been working for you as a business. It's something you can usually do, just off the top of your head, but just do the quick assessment of like, who are my ideal clients, but who are the clients that if I could, press copy paste on them, I would, over and over and over again. Understanding that, is something you could probably do as I'm saying this right now. Say, I love working with these guys. I love working with these guys. I love working with gals too. Sorry. But I love working with people. This is a great company. This is a great customer. This is a great individual type of person that I work with, but do the assessment of like, who works well for you now. That'd be the easiest first thing to do, because when you start thinking with them in mind, it will make you want to do more activity, and it'll drive you to doing more of the steps that assessing yourself and understanding yourself will do, because you'll go, man, if I could just clone those people, I would, and you clone them by getting more people just like them.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think by making ourselves think about that, we're more naturally prone to pursuing activities or pursuing tactics that are within that audience, right? I think they call it like reticular activation, when you if you're not thinking about blue cars, then you won't see blue cars. But as soon as you think about blue cars, you'll see all the blue cars. Yeah, now you're going to see blue cars, right? Like once I bought the car that I have, I suddenly saw that car everywhere that I was, right? Like I didn't think this many people had this car. Well, now I see it everywhere I go. And so I think naturally that is a great first step, because you're thinking about who you really want to work with, which also can translate into your best opportunity for your business. And then it helps you consider, like, well, maybe I start with calling those customers and seeing if they have any referrals. Maybe there are places they're all gathering, right? For us, we work with quite a few companies in the eye care industry. And so there are certain trade shows that we can go to connect with new businesses and new companies within that industry. So I love that answer. And I think it's exactly right. The one thing I might add to it is to be thinking about, a lot of times people don't do the consistent things that they could do to stay in front of people on a regular basis, whether it's email marketing or just like a specific follow-up process to stay in front of their best clients. And making sure you have that process in place it's that dating analogy, right? If you drop off the face of the earth, then nobody's going to want to date you. So making sure you're staying in front of people consistently, kind of having a process in place and forcing yourself to implement that process will also be helpful.
That's right.
Awesome. Yeah. And we have our next question from Rachel. She asked, how long does it take to build a marketing plan?
I'm going to take this one, Brian. Yeah, I'm going to take this one. Right. So it is 100% dependent on your company size, how many products you have, and services, etc. Because there could be several components, right? When I worked in a corporate environment, there were different product lines, and each product manager and marketing coordinator within those product lines created their own marketing plan that then fed up to a bigger marketing plan, right? But for the average size small business, so our marketing physical process takes about 4 to 6 weeks. And that's about right. That's if you're trying to keep it at a good clip. It could take a lot longer than that, from depending on how much research or information you need to dig up, how easy your data is to access, I guess. But ideally you would do it within that kind of time frame, because everything's fresh and you're thinking about it. In terms of hours, like man hours, I would say somewhere, depending on the size of your business, anywhere between 25 to 40 hours just to like sit and think through some of these things, whiteboarding. If you need to be intentional about doing this, I would recommend blocking out at least 1 day to start the process of thinking through it. And then maybe once a week for the next 4 to 6 weeks, you block out a half a day or a day just to think through your marketing plan.
Awesome.
And you have anything to add to that, Brian?
No, I think that's right on. And I think the biggest piece to speak to is the intentionality of it. I mean, you could just not do marketing, and just not go after it and just live through the natural things that happen, the word of mouth and that first bucket. But your crisis moment will come after the opportunity to really plan your marketing. It's not going to happen and then give you 6 weeks to plan. That never works like that. And so, if you don't take the intentionality when you have the luxury of time to do the planning, and the planning is really, it's fun. It doesn't hurt your feelings. It usually excites you as business, and it can get everybody in line with a bigger vision. So it's a good thing to partake, and it's not, but waiting and putting it off is like just not going to the gym. Like, it's going to matter when you have a heart attack, you're not going to now be able to go back and work out. So the trick is that you do need to be thinking, ahead. And again, that's the challenge of being a leader, is like, you need to cast vision. That's your biggest, most important thing, is to cast vision. And this allows you a roadmap. Talk about casting a vision. If you can lay out in a concise and developed way where you want things to go, that you can point back to, that you can readdress, like it's a tool and a weapon that you can use throughout many, many challenges in your business. And so I would say that, you have to be intentional, and you have to take the step to do it before the crisis comes. Because when the crisis comes that your pipeline is dead, when the crisis comes that you're on zero sales, when the crisis comes that you're at layoffs, you will not have 6 weeks to set aside time, like unless you just don't have a business anymore, in which case you have all the time in the world. So I definitely think that's the right way to think about it, Stephanie.
Yeah. If we're waiting until the moment that we need it, it's too late. If we're waiting to do marketing, proactive marketing until the moment that we need it, it is too late, for sure.
Awesome. And one final question for you guys. What makes a strategy successful, and what are some indicators that you should adjust a marketing plan?
Let me address the second one first. You should always be adjusting your marketing plan all the time. That's what the assessment and running those analytics and tests. The likelihood that you have Nostradamus figured out a perfect marketing plan that you can execute over time forever is, I want you to come work for me. That sounds awesome. But it's not highly likely, because the things that change are your business changes, your customer profile changes, and the world changes on you all the time. That's always changing. If you just think from a technological standpoint, I know you guys, TJ and Stephanie could both vouch for this. Email changes, and email is a technology that's, I think, 40 years old at this point. And email changes all the time. When they added the promotions inbox to both Outlook and Gmail, that completely changed the way that you could market. Like, it changed it completely. It changed what you have to say, how you say it. That changes, right? So even old technologies like email changing all the time. Websites change, web technology changes, Google changes its algorithm. Those are just the digital pieces of it. But then people's sensibilities change. What the world changes. We have major events and crises. I don't know if anybody remembers, but in 2020, we had this really big thing happen in the world that kind of made everybody think and act differently, right? So you should always be reassessing your marketing plan. And that's less of a function of you just constantly taking a magnifying glass to your marketing plan, and more of a function of creating a marketing plan that has analytics built into it and has metrics built into it that make it accessible, so that you're just the process assesses itself all the time, and your system is assessing itself all the time, and it's running its own, giving you an idea of what its health is.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the first part was, TJ.
So I have it pulled up. So just to align with what you were talking about, what are some indicators that you should adjust? So Brian is 100% right. You should always be assessing how you're doing. You should always be comparing your analytics against, measuring your analytics against what the goals were for your marketing plan. And that's the indicator right there, is if the goal you have, you're not meeting the goal that you had with the plan that you have, then you probably need to make some adjustments. Now, there also could be some kind of come to Jesus moment of maybe my plan was too ambitious, right? Like, you need to kind of be able to understand that if there's a huge gap in the goal number and your plan results, then that also could just mean you were too ambitious with your goal, or you need completely different tactics that can get you there faster, right? So that's the biggest indicator, is that you're not meeting your goal. And then that takes you back to evaluate a whole bunch of things that I think we would take 30 minutes just to discuss what you could evaluate, the things you could look at to determine what's going wrong in the plan. But then what makes a strategy or plan successful? I think building that foundation, right? Building our marketing strategy based on the business strategy and goals. That would always be my answer, because if you're implementing a whole bunch of tactics, when I first started Pace, I would get a lot of, well, so-and-so says I need to do this and I need to do this. And it was always tactic driven. And maybe you don't need to do anything. You cannot do any of the marketing tactics and potentially still be successful in your business. Are those tactics the things you need to do in order to get to where you want to go as a business, right? And so that filters, like that is all built off of that foundation of understanding our marketing strategy, how that relates to our business strategy, and then how we're going to build that strategy out down to the tactics.
Bingo.
Bingo.
I would have said Yahtzee, but just
Yahtzee. Wowza. Okay. TJ, do we have any additional questions, or?
I think that's it.
We'll wrap it up. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We're glad to have you here, and we hope you got a lot of value out of this webinar.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.